This is Live Talk with Dwayne Moore. We're talking worship on a global scale.
Hey everybody, welcome to Live Talk. I'm Dwayne Moore. Always glad when you tune in to listen to us wherever you may be in the world. You may be listening in Asia or in some parts of Europe via satellite television. Welcome. I hope that you can understand my southern Alabama English, but we are so glad that you're with us. And maybe you're listening via podcast somewhere, or maybe you're here in the United States and you're listening and watching maybe YouTube or Facebook. You could be anywhere, watching in many different ways, or listening to the podcast. However, you have joined us. We are glad that you're here. Today we have David Manner. David is the executive director of the Kansas-Nebraska Convention of Southern Baptists. That's a long name, but it's a wonderful name. It represents an incredible group of churches there in Kansas and Nebraska, those two states. And David oversees those churches, and we're going to hear from him today. We're going to hear some powerful wisdom, some good old-fashioned practical advice on leading in churches, and really just how to balance the craziness, the business of life. And he understands the business of life because he has got a lot on his plate, and yet he's taken time today to share with us so we can share with you, because he loves people and he wants to pour into people. And that's so obvious in this interview. So before we get with David, we're also going to take a few moments and tell you what's coming up for us. So you can pray for us in the coming weeks as we hit the road again, traveling and teaching and sharing in many parts of the United States. And so we'll be right back with more Live Talk, and then we'll get with David Manner today also in a wonderful interview. So stay tuned, much more to come.
Worship is more than music. It should be a lifestyle. Join us for Live Talk with Dwayne Moore, Fridays at 11 a.m. U.S. Central, 12 noon Eastern, and 6 p.m. Central Africa Time. We are live each week on our Live Talk Facebook page. Live Talk is also broadcast across Asia on kingtelevision.tv. Live Talk with Dwayne Moore. Global worship conversations.
Well, as you probably know, if you listen to us very often, if you follow us, we are a resource ministry. That means we try to provide quality resources to help churches and to help Christians grow in their worship of God. Now, we can do that in many different ways, and we offer many different kinds of resources. For example, we write books. I've been writing Bible studies and leadership books for many years, and I've got several books out. You can find those on Amazon and christianbooks.com and other places. You can find our books. Just look up my name and you can find books by me. Pure Praise was my first book that I wrote, and it's been used in many churches. Thousands have been through it, and it's been used in worship teams and Bible study groups. It's used in universities and seminaries. So that was our first resource. It's a 9-week Bible study. We have other books as well. Our latest book is called He, We, They. He, We, They, the life-altering formula of the model prayer. And of course, this is a Bible study on the Lord's Prayer. And I'm so excited about how God is already using that book. So that is what we mean by resources. They're ways to help people grow in their worship of God. But not only that, we also are a resource in that we speak and we travel, and we speak in colleges and universities. We speak in churches. We do conferences. So we have a lot of those sort of things coming up in the next few weeks. So I want to just mention these to you in a form of prayer, as a prayer request to you, that you would lift us up, because I've been gone to Africa for 6 weeks. I've been home now for 2 weeks, and that's a much needed rest to be back with my wife and my family. But starting next week, I'll hit the road again, and I'll be gone for First, we're going to Cedarville University. I'll be speaking there. We're also doing a global student worship gathering there on the campus. They're hosting it, but we have clusters of students meeting in several different colleges and universities and places around the globe, frankly. So that's happening. And then from there, we go to Vermont, and we'll do a Next Level Worship conference for the churches there in Vermont. Many of the churches, especially in the Baptist Convention there, they're hosting it. And very excited to encourage them and build them up, because some of those guys are trying to do it all. They're leading the music, they're preaching the messages, and they're having to wear so many different hats. And so anyway, we can encourage them. We want to do that. We're bringing a team of people in that'll be joining me to pour into those pastors and those worship leaders for a weekend. And then I'll be speaking, and our team will be spreading out in different churches and speaking on Sunday. And so after that, then I go to Jackson, Tennessee, where I will be doing 2 different conferences for pastors, and I'll be teaching on prayer from my new book, He, We, They. In fact, the Tennessee Baptist State Convention is using He, We, They, featuring that book across their state with their pastors, encouraging them to use it as a church-wide campaign for their churches in 2023 and beyond. And so we're excited about getting to share these principles with those pastors, and we believe it can make a real impact in their churches. In fact, we believe that revival can come not through reading somebody's book, no, but through prayer, clearly biblical prayer, that as the Lord laid it out in the Lord's Prayer, as it's often called, the model prayer. So we're going to dissect that and offer the pastor some resources to help their churches grow in prayer, and also therefore grow in worship, in loving God with our whole heart. As we pray to Him, as we focus on Him in prayer and praise Him in our prayer times, it's going to expand our worship experience with God. But also, it will lead us to unburden ourselves with things that we carried around out of just, well, maybe it's habit. Maybe we're just used to carrying around these big, heavy loads. But we don't have to. We serve this wonderful Father who says, cast your care on Him. He cares for you. So as we do that, then we're able to pick up somebody else's burden. Then we're able to pray for other people. And that's what I'll be teaching to these pastors. And that's what He, We, They, the book He, We, They talks about. So that's what we mean by resources. And then we also are doing some conferences we have coming up, and I'll tell you more about those in the coming weeks. But it's incredible. Go to our website, nextlevelworship.com/resources, and you can see we have leadership materials, we have Bible studies, we have devotionals, a lot of good stuff for you. So, and pray for us as we hit the road and with our team, and just to go out there again and encourage Christians and well, do what we're called to do, make disciples. And along the way, share our faith with those we meet in restaurants and grocery stores and wherever we may be. That is what we try to do at Next Level Worship. Well, let us know how we can pray for you. Send us a message at office@nextlevelworship.com and let us know how we can pray for you. We'd love to do that. We have a team that loves to take time to pray for those that reach out to us. So thank you again for joining us, and we'll be back in a few moments with David Manner. I'll introduce him more formally when he's with me during the actual interview. But trust me, this guy's got a lot of really wise stuff to say, especially to church leaders. So I hope you'll stay tuned and listen closely to this incredible interview. We'll be right back.
Live Talk with Dwayne Moore. Biblical, worship, perspective.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to Live Talk. We just get the privilege to interview some incredible people every week. And this week is certainly one of those weeks that I've been looking forward to. We have David Manner. I'm saying your name correctly, right, David?
You
David
are.
Manner.
That's correct.
David is the executive director of the Kansas-Nebraska Convention of Southern Baptists. Now, that's a long title, man. It takes a while to say.
Yeah. Yeah, we are actually rebranding. We're keeping that name, but we're actually rebranding ourselves now and rolling that out in just next month, actually.
Oh, are you? Wow. Well, I'll have to hear
Yeah,
more
yeah,
about whatever you can divulge at this point. But
you
yeah,
bet.
David, we are honored to have you, friend. You're an
Thank
author
you.
and just a wonderful and influencer in our country, no doubt in other countries as well. We have people that are watching and listening both here in the United States as well as other countries. And so let me just briefly introduce you and say things I know you wouldn't say about yourself. So I'm going to say it for you. Before joining the convention staff, obviously I'm reading this, but I love it. I'm going to read it. Before joining the convention staff, the Kansas-Nebraska convention in 2000, you served, it looks like, for 20 years
I
in
did.
worship and administration with churches and in
Did.
4 different states.
Hmm.
Kansas, Arkansas, Texas, Oklahoma.
Right.
So are you
Yeah,
from one of those states?
I'm from Oklahoma. Grew up there, went to college there, went to seminary in Texas. I served some in Oklahoma, and never. Once I left college, didn't go back to Oklahoma
Okay.
except for family. But served in Texas while I was in seminary, and then Arkansas for 5 years, and then actually before I came to the convention in 2000, I served in a church in Kansas for 13 years as the worship and administration pastor there.
Oh, okay.
So
Wow.
really the last 35 years I've been in Kansas in actually just two positions. So I've been at the convention now for 22 years and then was a local church for 13 years prior to that.
Okay. So you've been there for 22 years in different capacities. Okay.
I have, yeah, started as worship and administration for our convention. So obviously I love writing in that area, teaching in that area. That's,
Yeah.
that's my background in
Well,
education and all those kind of things. So
yeah, clearly it is. It says you hold a bachelor's of music at Oklahoma Baptist, which you mentioned,
correct.
a master's of church music at Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. I'm saying the whole name because not everybody listening would be familiar. Normally I just say Southwestern, but a lot of people don't know what Southwestern.
Right.
So I'm going to be specific. Also, a
Hmm.
doctor of worship studies from Robert E. Weber Institute for Worship Studies. So very,
Yeah.
very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
no doubt your
Yeah. That's,
experience
and
there.
that's framed much of my writing.
Oh, I bet it did. Yeah. I love what they teach, and I love the heartbeat behind the Robert Weber Institute. So actually, speaking to um, one of their directors right now reached out to me, Frank Fortunato. I'm not sure I'm
Yeah.
saying his last
Yeah.
name correctly, but
I,
Frank wants.
I know him. Yeah.
Now, do you? Frank wants to get with us
Yeah.
and talk about some potential partnership in the future, and so we're just trying to find a time to do that. But I think, clearly, what I've read from your writings, David, and just what I see, I believe that our heartbeat is very similar on many things.
I think so too. And obviously we follow each other on social media, even though we've never met in person. Love to see what you're doing internationally and some of those things too. And I've got an opportunity to do some of that too. In fact, I see your Kenya coffee thing behind you. I actually taught a few years ago in Kenya, in Nairobi, at the Kenya Baptist Theological College there.
Oh,
And so love that culture and taught some worship coursework there.
yeah, we love Kenya. That was one of 4 countries we were just in. We just got back about a week ago, and my
I
body's
saw
finally
that.
adjusted. Yeah, but it was
Yeah,
almost 6 weeks of traveling. But we were in Kenya for close to 2 weeks. We love
great.
Kenya. We did a intensive school there, brought in worship leaders and pastors from several parts of the areas within that country and other countries. But
Hmm.
yeah, man, Kenya got us. They had a really good smooth transition in the presidential election, and they just celebrated that yesterday. Actually, just celebrating the new president, and it looks like they're heading in a really healthy direction.
That's good. That's good. I love those people and love that culture, and still have some good friends that we communicate with. And I'd love to go back sometime soon.
Yeah, well, I'd love to talk to you about how we could partner together to do some things in the future. But what I want to do today, because I know we've got some people just really looking forward to listening to you and hearing some of your wisdom. And if you guys, if you've read his book, Better Sundays Begin on Monday. You almost have to read the whole title to really get it. 52 exercises for evaluating weekly worship. It's came out in 2020, I think.
Mhm.
It is a tremendous resource. It's an asset to a team to have this book. So we want to promote this a couple of times, or maybe a few times during our show today. But if you've read that, then you know David's got a lot of good stuff to share. So David, I'd like to jump in with you and just tell us about your family. I think that's always a great place to start. Tell us what tell us about what you want us to know about you. But then I'm gonna ask you some questions in relation to people that lead worship or help facilitate that in a church setting. That's where I'd like to go today. Mm-hmm. But let's start with you personally. What do you want us to know about you?
Sure. Yeah, you've already shared kind of my history of ministry. And again, I've been at the convention here for 22 years and actually stepped into the executive director role about 18 months ago after serving for nearly 20 years in other roles in our convention. And so that's changed some directional things. And it means some of the areas I was teaching in before, I'm still doing, but some of the things I've had to delegate to some of those responsibilities. We've brought another staff member on actually that does our worship and communication for us. So actually a young man that grew up under my ministry years ago. So it's been a good partnership. My wife, Karen, is actually a school teacher and retired from school teaching a year ago, May, but then was retired for about 2 weeks and became children's minister at our church. So it was a short retirement. And so she does that here. And we live in Topeka, Kansas. And so she is children's minister there. My son-in-law and daughter actually are members of that church. My son-in-law is a student pastor there. So it's kind of a family affair.
Wow.
They're on staff some, but we have a brand new 4-month-old grandson named Cohen. And they live here in our same city in Topeka, Kansas. And so we get to spend a lot of time with them. So that's my family. We just have the one daughter.
Okay.
It's one grandson, 4 months old. Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah. Good stuff. It's I didn't know it'd be that fun, but man, it's great.
That's awesome. Well, I am we're not grandparents. We have grown children, but they're not married yet. But one of my dear friends, Scott Dawson, in fact, it's his birthday today. So happy birthday, Scott. I'll do a shout out to him, but he's an evangelist, but he's about to be a grandfather in about a month. His son is on our staff as our accountant, and they're all beaming, man. So
man, it is the best thing ever. I've
not experienced it, but
yeah. Well, if you get the opportunity in the future, it is good. It is good.
Yeah. Well, we are glad that you could take a few minutes to join us. I am curious though of this journey. I don't think that I can think of others right now off the top of my head that have gone from a worship leading position and vocation and emphasis to becoming an administrative leader among the whole state. And that's an interesting. Is that something you woke up one day and said, I'd like to be the executive director one day, or did that just kind of?
It was.
I'm just curious.
It just happened. It was. Okay. It was not aspirational. I mean, I think it just happened of spending a lot of time on convention staff and that just kind of evolving. And I think one of my spiritual gifts is administration, so that helped. Because I know not all musicians, that's not always their gift, but that is a gift for me. Okay. And so I think that was helpful in that process. And then just, being in the convention that long, we had to still go through the whole interview process. They interviewed other candidates too. And so I allowed my name to be submitted and feel blessed that I get that opportunity. It's, I thought after 20 years being on staff here, and then the last almost 2 years of executive director that I would know everything I was expected to do in this new role, but that's proven not to be true. It's I sometimes kid with my wife that in this role, I sometimes feel like a mayor of a small town that everybody want you to come to the ribbon cutting. And so they, all the churches want you to come and they're doing celebrations, anniversaries and those kind of things. So they like to have me there. Just to speak a word from the convention. So it's been good transition. It is unusual. A couple of weeks ago, it's been a month or so now, I was teaching in Mississippi for Mississippi Baptist Convention. And my friend Slater Murphy there asked me to come in. He's the director of worship and music for Mississippi. And he asked me to do plenary sessions for kind of as my role from worship, but also as executive director. And then he called back and said, hey, how about if you also then lead our choir and orchestra in their rehearsal and concert that night too? And so I not only was speaking, but then had the opportunity to do that. So that's kind of and he was saying that he didn't know of any executive directors for state conventions that had actually led choir and orchestra before for an event like that. So yeah, well, it is kind of unique.
I think it's amazing. I remember when I read about the announcement, I went, wow, David coming in there. But yeah, doesn't surprise me at all that God just brought that to you and kind of dropped it in your lap. You clearly had, got a lot of, made a lot of friends and built a lot of trust in that area and that state. And God just laid into that.
Well, I think one thing that's beneficial with that too is it allows me, as a former worship pastor, to speak into senior pastors, and worship pastors don't always have that opportunity where those senior pastors will actually listen to some of those worship conversations about it not being music and that flow in the service of it's not standalone sermon and then music and worship, and some of those conversations that I may not have been able to have in my previous role, I now can have, and so I'm thankful for that.
Yeah. I really think that's a wonderful position to be in, that you have the influence of pastors to speak into their lives and encourage them in that way. And I think the fact that you continue to, you didn't say no to leading that orchestra, you did it. I mean, I think that's pretty powerful that you're continuing to keep that freshness even in the area of leading worship. Well,
it was kind of therapeutic for me just to get to do that again, because it's been a little while since I'd had that opportunity, and so it was fun. I really enjoy that opportunity.
Well, when we were talking about some topics that we could cover today, a couple of things really caught my eye, and I'd like you to unpack what you mean by this title, and then whatever you'd like to share with us regarding it. But I guess it caught my attention because I can relate to it, and maybe others can too. Playing hurt. And then the subtitle is Leading Worship Even When We Don't Feel Like It. Been there, done that. What do you mean by playing hurt? That's an interesting way.
So let me maybe start that. That's a great jumping off place, Dwayne, and maybe start that by just asking some rhetorical questions, maybe for your listeners that kind of frame what I'm thinking here. So maybe the first question is, why is it that churches have created this culture that requires those of us in ministry, those ministry leaders, to fake it when they're wrestling with some of the same struggles of life that those church members are? So what has caused us to create that culture where we expect our platform people to always be on, or never to struggle with the same struggles that the rest of culture does? They are struggling with it, but sometimes we expect them then when they're on the platform to actually fake it. And so I guess then the second question is, how might our congregation then be more vulnerable or transparent? How are we going to encourage them to be more vulnerable, transparent, if we as their ministry leaders aren't modeling for them or giving them permission to do that in their worship? And so I think even we could take this a completely different direction and we'll do that, but even the songs that we write and sing sometimes contribute to that. It seems like they're not struggling with the same things we are. So if we were able to potentially as leaders model more for them, that transparency, the struggles that we're going through in life, and that's going to frame our worship. It doesn't change our worship to keep us from worshiping. It just allows us to worship more transparently, potentially. And so that would even lend to songs, actually, too, that help them have that voice. That I'm not sure we are writing enough songs that help a congregation grieve, cry out to God and ask God why, much like the lament. Those psalms of lament that more than half of those psalms are psalms of lament, and we sometimes lean more toward the happy side of that, instead of allowing our platform leaders to actually also model that transparency. So the title that I kind of use it, and it's actually one of the chapters of the book, a shorter version of that. I kind of attributed that to a sports analogy is like, even professional sports, or even high school sports, is those players often they play hurt because they want to keep their position. Unless they're debilitated or something's completely broken where they can't play any longer. Many of those will play every week with some kind of injury, and they'll tape it up, wrap it up. They won't even tell anybody potentially. And they continue to play hurt because they want to secure that position. I think sometimes those of us in ministry do exactly the same thing. We're afraid if we are transparent and vulnerable with our congregation, then they'll look for somebody else that can replace us, because there's this feeling of expendability. So that's kind of what framed the title for that. So I think then those of us in ministry feel this profound pressure to always then be on, because we're trying to take care of our family and secure our position.
Yeah.
And so let me use, if you don't mind, Dwayne, I'll use a personal illustration of that, even though it was 30 years ago. And I mentioned that we have one daughter and one son-in-law. So we actually adopted our daughter at birth 30 years ago. But prior to that, and it's been a long time, but it's still fresh on my mind, is my wife and I, we've been married for about 5 years. I was serving as a worship pastor in that church here in Kansas that I'd served for 13 years. We'd been married for about 5 years. And so we started wanting to start a family. And so we started, trying to conceive, and weren't able to. And we knew it might take some time. And so it just seemed like, though, that those months then actually stretched into a year and 18 months. And so we started wondering, is there some other issue there? And so we went through that process and realized there were some infertility issues, and started meeting with doctors to try to help with that process, and went through all the workup, as many of your listeners probably have done too. And ultimately, after a period of years, we were finally able to conceive. And so we were cautiously optimistic. In fact, we didn't even tell most of our church members. We told our pastor that I was serving with at the time, we told our parents, but that's pretty much it, because it had taken so long that we didn't want to be disappointed potentially if we had miscarriage or something like that. And so we didn't tell many people. And since through that process, then we got to like week 10 or week 11, they weren't able to detect a heartbeat. We miscarried, as many families have done before. Wow. And as they are and we were devastated. We were asking the questions, God, why? Are we not worthy of being parents? Or do you not trust us with that? And that wasn't the character of the God that we knew. But in that moment, we're asking those questions, like we talked about. We were playing hurt. And since that was a season too, that people didn't talk about infertility and miscarriages publicly. No. Our congregation didn't know that. And so that next Sunday that this happened midweek, the Sunday right after that, I still had to get up on Sunday morning and lead worship. And so I got up on the platform, not really believing the songs that I was responsible for leading that morning.
Wow.
And so I had to lead those songs, and I had to fake it through that, because that was my responsibility. Again, I was playing hurt. Nobody knew about it. And then I started realizing that I actually agreed with, Jesus from the cross when he said, my God, why have you forsaken me? Ultimately, the rest of the story is we were able to adopt our daughter, and we wouldn't have changed anything now. But in that moment, we realized that we had to fake it. So the question that I ask and respond is then serving in ministry we're not immune from the personal struggles of life of miscarriages and depression and family health issues and marital struggles and wayward children and all those kind of things. And so, and most of our congregations don't fully realize the physical and emotional and mental and spiritual demands required to us as those platform leaders every Sunday. They don't realize that. They know what we've invested in them individually, but they don't multiply that times the entire population of your congregation. And so if they would stop to think about that, they would realize, because we see them as personal counselors and friends and mentors and coaches and spiritual advisors. And they're, our pastors, our platform leaders, our worship leaders, they're the first ones we call when our families are in crisis or we're having trouble or we've experienced issues relationally, or they're the first ones, that we call church members to referee our relationships and our marriages and our children. And even over the last few years, Dwayne, and you've realized this, I'm sure, with the whole COVID issue, that's been elevated even more. It just seems like there's more of that internal conflict going on and pressure on the platform leaders. So the question is, how can we create a culture that better allows those worship leaders to be transparent? And then I believe that when we get to that place, we allow them that vulnerability and transparency that will model for the rest of the congregation. And our worship then will be even more profound because it'll be even more real, and they're not faking it as they're leading us in that process. So that's kind of that frame of that. And so,
I love it.
So the questions, and I know that the questions are kind of open-ended on that, but how can we create a culture that allows them that transparency?
Well, one thing you said that caught my attention among all those things you just shared, I agree with completely. You said something about the word permission, that they're not given permission or they don't give themselves permission. But I think either way, the word permission is important, because I can tell you and I know you understand it too, but I've led many situations where I felt like the pastor and the elders and the people, the deacons, they didn't want me to be transparent. They just wanted me to be my happy self. And so I didn't feel like I had permission. So what about that?
Yeah, I think it is a obviously there's a relational thing with the leadership of your church too, and I don't want the listeners to misunderstand. It doesn't mean that every Sunday you get up and unload everything that happened bad in your marriage that week. Right. But it is I think it is a permission from leadership, and it's a process to get there. Okay. But it's also then a permission from the platform for the congregation. And language could be as simple as instead of saying, "Hey, hope you had a great week, let's sing," you could start the service off by, even not every service, but a service, by saying, I know that some of you that have gathered here this morning don't really want to be here because of things that have gone on in your life. And we as a congregation can't imagine a better place for you to be. And even if as we sing these songs, your congregation are going to serve as that great cloud of witnesses that surrounds you, and we will sing these songs on your behalf, because there is no better place for you to be. And that language, that thing that you're feeling right now, is completely acceptable to a God that understands, a God that's acquainted with that grief. And you can cry out to him this morning, and that we're giving you permission that this is a safe place to do that. I mean, a simple thing like that. I was even thinking back, and we just celebrated, obviously, the anniversary of 9/11, but I was on convention staff when that happened. And I'm sure you experienced this too, Dwayne, in your leadership responsibilities. That week, I had worship leaders, after that happened, calling and saying, "What do we sing this Sunday?
Yeah.
How do we help our congregation grieve?" And because we didn't have language to help them with that. Instead, we assume that if we sing happy songs, it'll make them happy, at least for just a moment. But then again, we're asking them to be fake. And so I think the permission does have to be with your leadership to have those conversations. And again, this goes back, and much of my book is that understanding of that worship pastor, lead pastor, senior pastor relationship, and the value of evaluating what we do together, asking those questions together, so that permission is for each other. So it's not enough just for the worship leader to talk about it. The lead pastor needs to also be willing to express that vulnerability too. And then it says to the congregation, man, if our pastors that we trust, our spiritual leaders, are struggling with some of these things, then these feelings I'm having too must be okay with God. So that's the kind of permission thing I was talking about there, that that we're giving them, much like we give them permission to express their worship in various ways. We say that to them, if you want to lift your hands, this is a safe place to do that. If you want to kneel, we're also saying to them, if you don't want to sing because you don't feel that this morning, that's okay too. And that's acceptable to God. And he's big enough to handle it.
Yeah.
So I think that's the permission that I want to convey there.
And I can see how those feed into each other. I can see how making statements like you just shared, open it up at a service with that kind of idea of, this is a safe place to bring your burdens, to bring your troubles, your questions. I can see how that could feed into the deacons and the elders and the leaders of the church, seeing that and going, I really like what he just said. And so they begin maybe to loosen up on their side of things of, saying, what, actually, let's be more transparent like that more often. So I can actually see how you can begin to create a culture from what you actually say from the pulpit and on a Sunday morning. Yeah. Yeah.
Words do matter. And you know that from your leadership that they do. And what we convey to them can be simple. I mean, I think sometimes too, and you know that you in your leadership, you've been and seen this, that sometimes the language that we start a service with will frame what happens throughout the entire service. So if our opening language is flippant, then that will be the attitude of the congregation. If our opening language is sacred, even language, that we talk about, that worship is continuous, to remind them, because sometimes I think we come in and we even say things like, hey, we're going to start worship with this opening song. And you have to ask questions. So what is it we were doing before we came in?
Exactly.
Harold Best talks about that the worship's continuous depending on whom or what you're worshiping. Yeah. So if you're still worshiping, but it might have been self before you're coming in. So if we convey the attitude that worship doesn't start and stop, then when we gather, it's just an overflow of the worship that's already been happening throughout the week. And then when we send them out at the end of the service, it's going to continue as they leave that place. And that's again, that language that helps frame for them. So then they start thinking differently throughout the week. What is this worship that's happening through my life through this week? Then when we gather as a congregation, it's going to be an overflow of what's happened throughout the week. Can you imagine what our worship could be like on Sunday when people have had that attitude the other 167 hours a week or whatever, that's also worship? And so then Sunday then is not just the commencement of worship, but it's also the culmination of worship. And then that cycle just continues. So again, then when the struggles of life throughout the week, people also realize those struggles that I'm going through are also worship, and I can bring those struggles with me. And so I think the language sometimes with the leaders of the church, those deacons, elders, pastor might be concerned about is that, as a worship leader, we would get up and we would talk about our, the fight we had with our wife this week. And that's not the intent. It's more of just creating this culture of acceptability, that some of the things that you might be feeling are okay. And there's no better place for you to express those than here as we sing these songs, that we want you to be here, even if you don't feel like singing them.
Yeah. You mentioned personal illustrations. When my mother passed away a few years ago, we had to come back. We'd been with her in Georgia for several days, but she just, hung on, which everybody was okay with that. But I'd already missed a Sunday. I had to get back to my church in Louisville, Kentucky. And so just as we were leading, I mean, she was on the verge of death, and so, but I'm up here leading and I'm not going to be my happy self today. It's not going to happen. And so I was just very real with the people. And my son later told me, he said, Dad, my older son, who actually was one of our worship leaders on our team, but he said, Dad, I think people saw a different side of you today. I said, how do you mean? He said, they always see you as very joyful and excited. He said, but today you expressed what was really at that moment was feeling in your heart. And he said, I think people saw a depth in there that they'd not seen before. I said, really? And so I think it was actually healthy. I didn't do that every week, but I think sometimes you just need to be who you are. And if you're grieving or if you're struggling,
that's a great illustration,
that's who you
Dwayne.
are.
Yeah. Yeah, great illustration. Because in those circumstances, when I talked to use the illustration of the miscarriage, our congregation didn't know that. Mm-hmm. But in your situation, I'm guessing because you have a relationship with your congregation, many people knew that struggle you were going through.
Yeah, they knew. Yeah, I've been gone. I've been gone down, with my mom.
If you had gone up there on the platform and put that facade on, then they would have started wondering, well, when I grieve, I can't do that. So what is it about his spiritual depth that allows him to do that I can't do? All right. But that then allows them then to realize that we can't keep faking it when we're struggling with those things. And so when you model that for them, like you did for your son and for your congregation, then the rest of the congregation realizes that, grief is a natural part of life, and grief for the believer, it's the same, the passage, we grieve, but we don't grieve like those who don't have hope. So we still grieve, and that's still, we weep and we're sorrowful and we're missing that loved one potentially, but it doesn't mean that we stop worshiping either. We can still sing those songs, and we may sing them with more emotion in our voice as we sing them. But again, that we as worship leaders have a responsibility to model for our congregations what real worship looks like. And we got to stop faking it.
So, Rich, well, there's another topic that caught my attention, and obviously we could talk about that one, what we just talked about, for a long time. But can we also talk about the resting? Because the way you presented this as a topic to me as a possibility was that, well, Sunday's not a Sabbath day for the worship leader or the people on staff because we're working all day. So when do you rest?
Right.
That's a great question.
Yeah, it is a great question, and if it's a big biblical responsibility too, and so we have to ask that question. If, like you said, if Sunday is not our Sabbath, when is?
Right.
Are we taking one? And the question that we have to ask as leaders, if we aren't getting that rest, that's a biblical response. How can we have the resolve to lead people potentially to a place we no longer have the reserves to go ourselves? Yeah. And so we're expected to lead people on empty, but pretty much. And I think even the last couple of years have contributed to that to even more, because as it seemed like when we did all the shutdown and everything that, well, it might be easier because we're not meeting together. It was actually more difficult. I mean, it was more difficult leading worship from home than it was leading worship in person. And it was so hard, and it was a hard season. And so I think some are still recovering from that. They're not getting that much needed rest. And so I've had numerous conversations with some of those and their spouses about how they're feeling, having gone through that last couple of years or 3 years. And it wasn't the unprecedented situation of trying to do ministry in a new way. I think most of them stepped up to the plate on that. And it was like, man, I'm gonna take this challenge on, and we haven't been streaming. We're gonna learn how to do that in a week. And man, they stepped up to that. What was more difficult for them is, even though those leaders prayed diligently and sought wise counsel regularly, they still got beaten up from one side or the other, and sometimes both sides at the same time. And some of those congregants that previously trusted their decisions, it seems like now they no longer trust those decisions. And some of these pastors and leaders, those families trusted them to bless their marriages and baptize their kids and bury their parents, as you talked about. We trusted them to do that. And now with some of these issues, it seems like they no longer trusted us. So in fact, I think as they tried to figure out what was spiritually best for the whole, they had demands on them what was politically best for the few. And so if all of those people in our congregation, not just the last couple of years, but just in ministry, had those same expectations that their pastors would always respond, how can we not expect the total of that to eventually impact their health, their spiritual health, their physical health, their mental health on that too. So my prayer for leaders is that their congregations would not only give them a break, but give them the benefit of the doubt. And here's a challenge if you're a church member out there listening. My challenge for you is, before you criticize the decisions your pastors are making as nefarious or politically motivated, pray through those decisions just as much as they have before you actually criticize them.
Wow, love that.
So that idea of rest, I think has been exacerbated over the last couple of years in our leaders. And so I'm a real advocate, and I talk about this some, and that idea of that Sabbath, since they don't have one, we need to challenge our leaders that they need to take one. They need to take that time set aside. They need to have that time of rest for the sake of their family, for the sake of their church. And when they are rested, our churches, our worship teams that we lead will be the beneficiaries of a healthier leader. And we all know some of those leaders that they're just done. They're done physically, spiritually, emotionally, and consequently, when that occurs, our walls are down too. Moral failures can occur even more readily because those safeguards are not in place.
Yes.
And so I'm a real advocate too for ministry sabbaticals. In fact, our pastor in our church in Topeka just got back from one.
Okay.
And I believe that churches should put those safeguards in place. We have one of our pastors of a multi site congregation. They've got 11 or 12 campuses. So when he was, and he's been there for 20 plus years, when he was a few years in ministry and it was starting to take off, and he tells a story that he was just, to the place he just didn't feel like he could do it any longer. In fact, he even remembers exactly where he was when he got to that place, and texted his leaders and said, "I'm done. I can't do this anymore." And so they said, "Well, let's get you a sabbatical." And so they took a sabbatical that next summer for weeks, and came back, and he was fired up. He thought, I'm rested. I'm ready to go. And he came back. And then about 3 weeks later, he came to the same exact place he was before he went on the sabbatical. And so their church, which was a really creative thing, actually, they do every few years, every 5 years. And the requirement is they are not to be at their main campus on that weekend. So at Friday at 5:00 until Monday morning, they unplug from that campus. They're encouraged to go to church someplace else. They can go anywhere else. They may have to be one of their other campuses. But you might say, well, they could just come and not do anything. You know how that works. Somebody's going to hit them up in the hallway and things like that. And so they've initiated this rhythm of every 7 weeks for all their campus pastors, all the lead pastor, all their ministry staff, and their staff now. They've been doing this for a decade. Their staff now have said, even if we don't get a raise, please don't ever take that away from us, because it says to their families, we can be a regular family on this weekend. So whatever that rhythm looks like for a church of that rest, churches need to take care of their ministry staff and offer that to them. Ministry staff need to realize too, some people won't take that time away because maybe they're afraid that whoever leads for them will do a better job than they do. And so they need there's some of those elements. I get that. Yeah. Those things, or some of us are so controlling, we feel like nobody's going to do it as well as I do.
That's right.
So
or some of just haven't taken the time or the intentionality to help build into some other people that could actually lead. And I think there's a mentoring factor there that helps you set yourself up for these sabbatical moments.
Yeah. Yeah. Jesus talked about that. He said, come to me all you're weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. And he, talks about that. He said, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. And that actually a great translation of that word rest in that passage is not taking a nap. It's actually the word refreshment. And so I use the illustration sometimes when I'm talking on that passage, that when I was a college student, I worked outside construction, and we were, it was an aluminum company. And so we did siding on houses. vinyl siding, aluminum siding. We did carports and pool enclosures. And one summer, we were doing a pool enclosure, a swimming pool enclosure. And the pool was already in existence, so it was full of water. And this is southern Oklahoma. It was 105 degrees outside. I was a college student, and I would wear cutoffs to work. One of my jobs as that college student on that crew was, as we're shooting those screws into those beams and the roof on there, that some of those screws would inevitably fall off the end of the bit and fall into the pool. And so several times during the day, one of my jobs was to dive into that pool and retrieve those screws off the bottom of the pool so it didn't gum up the pump system on the pool. As I crawled back out of the pool, I had to crawl back up on a ladder, but just for a few moments, I was refreshed. And so that's that rest I think that Jesus is talking about there. It's not a pass. It's not freedom from responsibilities. It's that calming peace in the middle of those responsibilities. And so he talks about, my yoke is easy, my burden is light. And sometimes I think we're not allowing him to carry that burden for us. We're trying to carry it ourselves.
Oh, that's
so we put on those self-made yokes.
Yeah.
And he's saying, you don't have to do that, because when you take this kind of rest, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. And he even says in that, learn from me in that passage, because that's what he did. If Jesus had 3 years to do that ministry and he took that time alone to rest, then in our decades of ministry, we need to model that same kind of thing too.
Wow. Yeah, I along the way in different leadership trainings that I've had over the years, I've heard the word recreation be called recreation. And it can be something that's not healthy and not good for us if we just, that's all we do is recreation. But if it's intentional at those times that really can help us, then it can become recreation. I love that. I've always remembered that. And I think that's what you're saying, refreshment. What refreshes you? And is it a walk in I got back, I've been gone almost 6 weeks, and I was tired. My body was tired. I was glad to be home with my wife and my family. But I got away to a place that I actually, when I was a teenager, I would go to. It's a nature trail here in North Alabama. And they've still got it. Although there's beautiful homes built near it, they haven't sold out, and they've still got this place with a pond in the middle of a lake, a little small lake. And it's like, yeah. So I walked, I just took a walk around the lake, and it refreshed me. And I prayed and I thought. I didn't go over there with an agenda. I didn't go over there to work. I just needed to get alone. And whatever it is for you, I'd say whoever's listening, what refreshes you and what helps you recreate. And I think ultimately, that's a good word. For me, it comes back, same word you're sharing, but I think ultimately it comes back to God's word refreshes us. His spirit refreshes us. And where do we give someone said recently in an article that we shared on our website, elbow room for God. That's an Oswald Chambers statement, but some elbow room just for God to move in our lives and adjust us. That's important.
Yeah, that's a great word. And how I do that, I think it's creating rhythms of rest.
Okay.
We've got to schedule those, create space for that, calendar it. I mean, I don't get to do this often, but about every 6 weeks I will get away from my office, and I take some days off and things like that. But a part of my rhythm is we are in Topeka, Kansas, and Lawrence, Kansas is about 30 miles from here. And I'll put on my calendar away, and I'll go spend the day in Lawrence, Kansas, and I'll spend the morning in one coffee shop, go have lunch someplace, spend the afternoon in another coffee shop. Away from people that will just potentially see me, or even if I shut my door here in my office, I'll see distracting things on my desk and something will get my attention and I'll have to respond to it, or I have to get a phone call. And so to create, for those of you leaders that are out there, start with incrementally. Maybe it's an hour, maybe it's half a day. Don't fill up when you do get a day off, don't fill it up so much with stuff that you're not actually able to have some silence and solitude. Again, like you said, Dwayne, that elbow room that, sometimes we so fill up that day that we even kind of edge God out of it too. And so how can we expect to have that rest that Jesus promises us when we're not including him as a part of those days?
Well, this has been such a rich conversation. I want to talk about your book, Better Sundays book, for a few moments. We're going to take a break for a moment, and then we're going to come back. And I don't want to keep you too long because you got a lot on your plate. And I want to make sure you end your day rested, and we're not the reason you get worn out. However, I do. If you'll give us a few more minutes, I think
absolutely.
Some nuggets of truth in that book that I'd like for you to talk just a moment about, and help us understand why people need to be reading that book. And so I want to come back to that before we close today. But
thanks.
Everyone watching, we'll be back in a few moments. We want to show you just a brief video about what we've got going on with Next Level Worship. But we'll be right back with more live talk in just a moment with David Manner. Be right back.
You're listening to Live Talk with Dwayne Moore. International conversations on worship.
Hey everyone, we are back with more live talk. We have David Manner. He's the executive director of the Kansas-Nebraska Convention of Southern Baptists. So I've always assumed that they're literally two states joined together. Boy, that sounds like a big job.
Yeah, a lot of territory.
That's a lot of territory.
It is. Yeah. We always joke too. Our offices are in Topeka, Kansas, which is about an hour west of Kansas City, and we can actually drive to Nashville, Tennessee quicker than we can get to some of our churches in northwestern Nebraska. So it's a pretty big territory. A lot of driving.
There's a lot of driving. I remember that we did a youth camp out in Nebraska years ago, and all I remember then, and maybe different now, but there was just corn everywhere. There's more corn. There's corn. And beautiful people, but a lot of corn and a lot of driving.
There is.
Yeah. So that leads me to a question, David. I've just been wanting to ask you ever since honestly, it's been in my mind ever since I saw that you'd taken this position of executive director. How in the world do you have that large a scope of territory and that many churches and that many people? How do you do that and still get that thing we call rest? Or is rest, is that something that you look forward to one day in the sweet by and by? Do you really actually still get rest when you're doing all this stuff? I'm just wondering, how do you pull all that off?
Yeah, that's a great question. Sometimes Dwayne, when I write, I'm writing to myself, not to others, about some of those issues. So if I'm writing about rest, it's I'm not getting it. Yes, because it's therapeutic for me to remind myself too as I'm writing to others. So I'm living much of that I write. So it is difficult sometimes to balance that. We have a convention staff. We have some that work out of our office here in Topeka, but we also have some staff that are out in locations around Kansas, Nebraska too. So they're closer to some of those churches, but there are expectations that as executive director that I need to be out in those areas too. So example, so last night, speaking of not much rest, I was in western Kansas, in Hays, Kansas, speaking at we have campus ministry on 24 of our college campuses in Kansas, Nebraska. And so in Kansas, Nebraska, we call it Christian Challenge. Oklahoma, I think, calls it BCM for Baptist ministry on campuses, but we call it Christian Challenge. So I was out in Fort Hays State yesterday evening speaking at Christian Challenge out there, and they had a couple hundred students out there for that. So that's about 200 miles from Topeka. So I got home this morning about 1 a.m.
Oh, wow.
And got up. So that doesn't happen every day, but there are times when it does happen. So I drive, as many of our staff do, drive about 3,000 miles a month. So we do drive a lot, and then we do still, travel to other state conventions to do some teaching and things like that, and also internationally. So, like many of you that are listening, it's also a constant struggle to find that rest and that rhythm. One thing I've done, just personally, is I try to create some space by doing things that have nothing to do with my job. Okay. I'll give an example. So like this Sunday morning, I will actually be in my home church, and I'm working with 2-year-olds in children's ministry. So my wife's a children's minister there. And so Sunday, I'm working with 2-year-olds. That's not rest. Yeah, that's not rest, but it's like it frees my mind of some of those responsibilities. So sometimes if you can do things outside of that, it's kind of a respite from that too. So yeah, we travel a lot. We have a lot of churches. Much of what we do is we have a lot of church planting that we do. We do a lot of church health issues. So sometimes that's high stress, high emotion kind of stuff that we deal with struggling leaders, struggling churches. And so we, as our staff, and I, as executive director, we serve as kind of consultants for them. So I think I mentioned to you real quick, Dwayne, that we are rebranding, and you guys are some of the first. We're rolling it out at our annual meeting, but our new brand is going to be Church Forward. We read a book together about building your story brand, and they talked about the brand. It should be the hero of your story. So when we talk about Kansas-Nebraska Convention of Southern Baptists, they often think of our office in Topeka, when actually our focus is on the church. So Church Forward is our new brand. We're not changing our name, but when we do events, instead of the long name, we'll just call it Church Forward Leadership Conference or something along that line. So we've got a new logo, we're redoing website and all that kind of stuff. And then much of our ministry focus, we are doing an audit of what we do on the convention level of the ministries that we're involved in. And we're asking 3 questions. Are these ministries serving churches? Are they propelling leaders? And are they maximizing our partnerships? And if some of those ministries aren't, then we have to, even though they might have been good for a season, they're not good for this season. So that's a great question for churches to ask too, of, what is our mission? And if some of the things we're doing aren't helping us fulfill that, then maybe we should set that aside so that we can do the things that actually do help us fulfill that mission. So that's kind of where we are in this convention. So it's busy, but we love it.
Yeah, but I do sense you love it. And in loving what you do, and in being intentional and thoughtful and strategic even, and a lot of prayer, I feel like there's some rest even in that. That's what I've noticed about leading Next Level Worship. I mean, I feel overwhelmed a lot of times, to be honest, with some of the opportunities and the invitations. But ultimately, you just take it a day at a time, and you trust the Lord, and you trust your leaders. You trust those that God's brought you. And I loved how the very first thing you led with was, well, we have these other people out there working. Yes, we do. And that's it. This is a team effort. It's not all on David Manor to pull it all off. It's not all on Dwayne Moore. There are things that they want you for, and that's just welcome to that, that reality. But you clearly schedule some rest times. You do some different things. And that's what I wanted. I knew that. I just knew it. You couldn't be this fresh on a morning without having figured that out already. But I wanted you to express that to us so we could hear.
Yeah. Just like any ministry, there are weeks that you are overwhelmed. And this is a busy week for me. I've got 5 speaking things that I'm doing.
Wow.
I have to incrementally balance those and the preparation. And it's just a reminder too that you have to look ahead at your calendar and prepare ahead of time, because you can't get ready for 5 things on Monday morning to be able to teach for those. You've got to do them ahead of time. And then that also helps with that rhythm then too, that you're not constantly overwhelmed. And then there are seasons where it does slow down some. So this is just not one of them right now, between now and the end of October. Busy time for us.
It sounds like it's a busy time. Well, I don't want to keep you much longer, but I want to do another focus for a few moments on your book. And again, I'll read the title, Better Sundays Begin on Monday, subtitled 52 Exercises for Evaluating Weekly Worship. You can find that, I'm sure, online, probably in some bookstores. It's came out a couple of years ago, published by Abington Press. David, I really am impressed with that book, and I wanted to just share a quote from it and let you take a few moments and tell us whatever you want us to know that could encourage our listeners to find a copy. But in the very first chapter, by the way, I like how you keep them short. For people like me that have short attention spans, thank you. You get to the point, man, and you make it strong. But in this very first chapter, you say creating worship tourists. Well, you got my attention on that one. And you say if we never involve our congregants as more than casual bystanders while we read, speak, sing, play, pray, testify, lead, meditate, commune, baptize, confess, and you go on, then how can we expect them to transform from passive spectators to active participators? Aren't we really creating worship tourists? What a powerful idea. Why don't you tell us about that and why this book can maybe help a congregation, help a pastor, move people into a different realm than that?
So I'll dig into that chapter just a little bit. Let me kind of preface it by saying the intent of the book was it could be a single staff pastor, local church that has no musical background, could use this as a tool, but also it could be a multi-staff congregation with multiple teams. A choir could use it and read together. Each chapter is standalone. And as you said, Dwayne, they're all short chapters, just a few pages long. At the end of each chapter, there are questions for an individual or teams to ask about what they just read and make application in their own context. So they read it together, ask those questions of their own context and how that might apply. So, and then at the end, there's also in the appendix, there's some evaluation tools. It's not chronological, so you can start on chapter 1, the worship tourist. You can go to chapter 25 to start with, and you can jump around. So hopefully that's a good resource for your churches. So the worship tourist aspect, and you kind of nailed it with that quote. I think it's the balance of passivity or being passive worshipers or participative worshipers. And so we as worship leaders, if we do everything for our congregation, then we're encouraging them to be passive spectators. And then we wonder why they evaluate what we do and don't like it, potentially because they don't, sometimes they I use the illustration in there, they are like tourists that they visit the site, and if they don't particularly like what they experience, they don't come back. And so it's the difference between a tourist and a traveler. So a tourist is those, and you're a traveler, Dwayne, because you just came back from 6 weeks of traveling. You are not a tourist. You were, as a traveler, you immerse yourself into the culture. You experience everything of that culture. You're not just a passive going to the highlights and the tourist traps of that particular thing. And so it's that whole idea that travelers actually, for travelers, the journey is just as important as the destination. For tourists, it's what's the highlight. It's that trap of, we're going to Disney.
Well, I remember you said in there, what's in it for me? I read that. Quote. I thought, yep. That's how many of us are.
That's exactly it. And so tourists are like, I'm going there for what I can get.
Yeah.
But a traveler is like you just got back from 6 weeks of. Your goal as a traveler was, what can I give?
Yeah.
So maybe the question is not what's in it from me, but what's in it of me. And that's the difference between a tourist and a traveler. And so it's the whole idea. Are we, what are we doing? Here's maybe a question that you'd ask at the end of the chapter. In our context and culture, how are we encouraging our congregation to be participative worshipers and not passive spectators? So are we as the platform leaders doing everything for them so that we're not encourage them to participate? And we encourage them to sing, but are we doing everything on the platform? Our leaders doing it all so that they come in much like going to a theater and they just observe instead of immerse themselves as travelers on that journey with us. The whole book, the intent is, as the subtitle says, of evaluating our weekly worship. The reality is that in our church cultures, worship evaluation is already happening. It happens in the hallways and parking lots after the service. They're evaluating what we're doing. So why wouldn't we, as leaders, want to preempt those conversations with something that's healthy and that potentially could help us get better at that? So that's the whole goal of it. And sometimes we're afraid of evaluation. Evaluation doesn't mean we just are highlighting the negative things that occurred, but we're also affirming those positive things that occur too.
Right.
So evaluation is both positive and negative potentially.
Well, I'm just looking at some of the evaluations. So some of these 52-week snippets that you bring, and I love the way you title them, but they're they intrigue me. Farm team, mindless worshipers, worship leading Pharisees. Please, sir, I want some more. I'm just reading some of the ones here. Hooked on a feeling. Buyer's remorse, conversational narcissists, starting a fire from scratch. I mean, you got a lot of good stuff in here, Dave, that you've clearly spent a lot of time thinking through. So I think this could be a wonderful tool for a team to go through, or a staff to go through. And I want to encourage everyone to pick up a copy. Where can they find it? Where can they find your book?
Yeah, it's available on all the sites, on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Books A Million, all those. You can go directly to Aberdeen Press. It's there available too. Some Barnes and Nobles have them in the store, actually on the shelf. Not all, but I know some do. But they're available online. If you're an ebook reader, it's also available in ebook on all those sites too. But it is available in hard copy through all the online sites. So. It's Christian books. It's available there too. So wherever you like to shop for books, pretty much it's available. In fact, it's I've found recently that's it's available in other countries too. On some of their sites too.
Good, great. Yeah. Well, how can someone reach out to you and find out more about getting in touch? Maybe not in touch with you directly because you're a busy guy, but how can they find some resources other than your book? Do you have a website that they could go to?
I do. And how I actually started writing was blogging. And so I've got a worshipevaluation.org. That's actually .org.com or .net. I've got all three of those. I used to post weekly. I don't post as much every week, but I do still post some new articles and new thoughts about leadership and some of those things that occur and cultural things. So that I still do some writing in those areas and do some teaching. And I'm open to somebody emailing me with a if they have a question or a conversation, I'd love to visit with somebody about that. But I'll even give my email address is dmanner, MANNER, at kncsb.org, kncsb.org. If somebody has a question or even maybe something we've talked about today, I'd love to follow up with you and I'll respond to your emails. It may not, if I'm traveling, it may not be immediately, but I'll get back to you as quickly as I can. And love having those conversations.
Well, thank you.
Love talking about this topic. And man, I appreciate what you're doing, investing in those worship leaders, not only in the United States, but internationally too. And you've realized this, Dwayne, that many of the worship wars that we fought here, they're fighting there. They're just different conversations about what they're balancing and struggling with in many of those countries. So,
yes, sir. Yeah. Well, we all have our part to play in the big kingdom, and so I'm grateful for a friendship and a partnership with you. And I'm glad for the time today. I know our listeners have loved it and enjoyed it. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. David, thank you for this time.
Thank you.
And I want to pray over you and also the listeners that are listening. I normally would ask you to pray, but I don't know. I feel led to pray for you. So I'm going to do that.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank
Father, I just thank you for David. I thank you, Lord, for his ministry, his family. I thank you for the years of devoted service he's put into working with churches and helping worship leaders and pastors and congregants understand deeper and experience a deeper worship with you and of you and focused on you. And God, I know that's his heart. And God, I pray you give him the strength, the health to continue to do what he's called to do. I pray, God, for the resources that he needs, the creative thoughts that he needs, the people. Often the people are the greatest resource, not so much the money. God, I know that we need money, but we need people, laborers in the kingdom, in the harvest, as you said, that we pray for the Lord of the harvest to provide those laborers. So we pray for that over his ministry and there in Kansas-Nebraska, in that large area. God, what a wonderful place to see a spiritual awakening, to see revival. And God, we pray that you'd use the ministry that David has, as well as this wonderful convention, to continue to minister to churches and the people there. God, we pray for the listeners and those that are watching. Some don't even understand English very well, especially my version of Southern English. They struggle with, I'm sure. But God, I pray that today has made some sense to them, that they see that we're more than some show on a platform. God, this is real to us. Christianity is the real deal. You are alive, and you are the one that gives us joy and peace and hope. And for those who don't have that, I pray, God, that today they would trust you and let you be the Savior of their life, because you came to die on the cross. You came back to life for us. We're so grateful for that. And God, thank you for the pastors and the worship leaders and church leaders that have listened to David's interview today. And God, I know we all walk away with some information, as well as some wisdom and maybe some encouragement for how we can do ministry even more effectively. We pray this in your name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Dwayne.
Thank you, David. Well, thanks everybody for watching. We'll be back in a couple of weeks with more Live Talk. See you then.
Thanks for listening to Live Talk with Dwayne Moore. Live Talk is presented by Next Level Worship International. To learn more about our global community and find great devotionals and other resources on lifestyle worship, visit nextlevelworship.com.